The Liberal Party has a new leader, and very soon the country will have a new prime minister. Mark Carney crushed the competition in the leadership race, winning the vote with a decisive 85% on the first ballot.
In first place, the next Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, with 100.
In fact, it was closer to 86%. The result, not much of a surprise. The former Bank of Canada and Bank of England governor had been considered the front runner since the race began in early January. Carney is expected to be sworn in as Canada's 24th Prime Minister in a matter of days. Here to tell us more is CTV's chief political correspondent, Vassy Kapelos. Good morning, Vassy.
Hey, Stefan, great to see you.
You as well. Not a surprising win or victory, but perhaps the gap was. What was the tone or mood like in the room as this was being announced?
Yeah, I think the margin of victory not necessarily came as a surprise, but put a fine point on the consensus view that had emerged over the last month in particular that Mark Carney was going to win this thing. 86%, close to 86%, 85.9%. That is a resounding and very definitive win. And particularly when you compare that number to what the other candidates got. Chrystia Freeland, who of course has been a very prominent cabinet member and the person that led to this entire race happening, coming away with just 8%, and both Frank Bayless and Karina Gould with just around 3%. So I do think that, you know, informing the minds of Liberals as they voted was who is best positioned to contend against the Conservatives in the next election. And the answer to them in that room last night and on paper when they cast their vote was clearly Mark Carney.
You know, a lot of people have a question around what's next. I think we've explored what the next steps are when it comes to Carney being sworn in, maybe announcing cabinet, calling an election. Many are still unsure about what's next for Justin Trudeau himself. Any insight there?
My understanding is that there'll be some time off included and then not anything that is predetermined. And I think that we could be upon that time pretty soon. My understanding is the swearing in for Mark Carney could happen as soon as tomorrow. New cabinet sworn in as soon as Wednesday. We could be off to the races in an election as soon as a week from today. So this week will be full of lots of ceremony, lots of changes. And, you know, as all of that comes to be, Justin Trudeau will also leave that position officially. He spoke to the crowd last night. And I got to tell you, Stefan, if this had been the event that took place in December, right, I don't even know if he would have been there to speak because of, you know, his lack of popularity at the time, because of the degree to which his own brand was impacting the party's brand. What a difference time makes, right? He was very warmly welcomed in that room last night. He seemed happy to be there as well and address Liberal supporters. And this question of Trump has not only changed the dynamic for all political parties, but for the Prime Minister himself and his ability to kind of rebound from the depths of his unpopularity just a few months ago.
And we anticipate hearing less and less from Trudeau, but I want our viewers to hear some of his farewell speech.
This is a nation-defining moment. Democracy is not a given. Freedom is not a given. Even Canada is not a given. None of those happen by accident. None of them will continue without effort. It takes courage. It takes sacrifice. It takes hope and hard work.
Vassy, even Canada is not a given. It certainly reminds us not to take anything for granted with this ongoing conversation, our relationship with the United States. Were there any other highlights from that speech for you?
I thought it was, you know, watching his daughter introduce himself. I've covered the entirety of this government, and I remember when his kids were tiny at the start of it. I remember being a reporter up on Parliament Hill when his youngest, Hadrian, was just like a toddler running in and out of caucus on Wednesdays. We used to go scrum all the politicians as they went into their respective kind of rooms with their parties. So I thought that was, you know, just sort of a reflection of time, right? That little markers here and there as she introduced her dad. I think for for me, the big takeaway was not necessarily the content of what he said, just the reception, as I mentioned, that, you know, he was such a drag on the party from a political perspective over the last 6 months of his tenure. And so much has changed around the issue of Donald Trump and the degree to which Canadians are concerned about this existential threat that he poses to our country and our country's economy, that it has repositioned, I think, Trudeau in a number of ways. That's not to take away from some of the less popular things that he did, and certainly a lot of the animus felt by a number of Canadians. But at the same time, I think even in the last few hours, the last few days of being Prime Minister, he was calling Donald Trump and having to contend with the imposition of these tariffs. It was a very different way out than it would have been just a few months ago.
Right, and some people are saying some of his final moments as Prime Minister have been his best. Thank you for this, Vassy.
You bet, anytime.
Take care.